They called it the ugliest acre in the county. The soil was dead. The air smelled like vinegar and wet cardboard. And when 26-year-old Maya Hartley signed the deed for $1,200 at the Grayson County tax auction, the entire room laughed out loud. The auctioneer actually paused, his gavel hovering in the air, as if waiting for her to come to her senses. Her own father sat in the back row, with his arms crossed, shaking his head slowly, the way he had shaken it when she dropped out of community college, when she married Derek, when she filed for divorce, when she lost the receptionist job at the dental office. That shake said everything. It said, "Here she goes again." It said, "My daughter has no sense." It said, "That girl wouldn't know a good decision if it grew on a tree." And trees, everyone knew, did not grow on the property at the end of Mill Road. It was 1 acre exactly. A perfect square of failure. Tucked behind the old textile mill that had closed in 2008 and left behind nothing but rusted chain link and broken windows. For 60 years, the town of Millbrook had used that acre as its dumping ground. Autumn leaves raked from 10,000 lawns. Christmas trees dried to brown skeletons. Branches downed by ice storms. Wood chips from the municipal stump grinder. Year after year, decade after decade, the town had piled its organic garbage there until it rose into a compacted mound, 3 feet above grade, crowned with thistles and something locals called devil's weed that turned your skin red if you touched it. The soil underneath was clay, hard, grey, Michigan clay that held water like a grudge and cracked like pottery in August. The county had tried to sell it 5 times before. No bidder, no interest, no hope. It was a place where even the crows looked depressed. Maya had not planned to buy it. She had gone to the auction because her father, Jim Hartley, had told her she needed to stop feeling sorry for herself and start thinking about her future. He meant an apartment in town. He meant a steady job at the grocery store where her cousin worked. He meant normal. He did not mean that his only daughter would raise her numbered paddle for Lot 47 and commit the last of her savings to a pile of rotting leaves that the county appraiser had described, in actual legal documents, as having no agricultural value, no commercial potential, and no recommended use. When the gavel came down, someone in the back actually clapped. Slow, sarcastic applause. Derek was there. Her ex-husband, 2 years divorced, sitting with his new girlfriend who worked at the bank and wore blazers. Derek did not clap. He just smiled that smile. The one that had made her feel small for 4 years. The one that said, "Watch this girl fail." The one that had convinced her she was lucky to have him, lucky he stayed, lucky anyone wanted her at all. She had $1,200 left in her checking account. After the purchase, $1,200 and a 1998 Ford Ranger with 180,000 miles and a transmission that whined in 3rd gear. She drove out to the property the next morning at dawn because she could not sleep and because she needed to see what she had actually done. The October air was sharp, the kind of cold that makes your lungs feel clean and your heart feel exposed. She parked on the gravel shoulder of Mill Road and climbed through a gap in the fence where the chain link had rusted away. Her boots sank into the matted carpet of brown leaves. They made a sound like walking on stale bread. The mound rose before her, brown and grey and lifeless, studded with the white stubs of old Christmas trees, poking through the surface like bones. She walked to the centre. A hawk circled overhead, crying out once, then moving on to better hunting grounds. Maya stood there in her thrift store coat, her breath clouding, and she felt the weight of every laugh from the auction house pressing down on her shoulders. She felt the weight of Derek's smile, She felt her father's head shaking in that slow, exhausted rhythm. She felt for a moment that they were all right, that this was the final proof, that she was, indeed, a woman who made terrible choices and would end up alone and ridiculous and poor in a town that already had too many stories like that. But then she noticed something. Near the northern edge, where the leaf mound met the clay, there was a depression. A sink, really, about 6 feet across, where the ground had settled in a perfect bowl. And in that bowl, despite the frost, despite the vinegar smell, despite everything the county said about dead soil, something was growing. Not weeds, not thistles. Small, pale, finger-like shoots pushing up through the leaf mould. White and delicate and utterly foreign to that landscape. She knelt down, her knees soaked through her jeans. She touched one with her fingertip. It was soft, alive. She dug gently with her fingers, pulling back the mat of compressed leaves, and what she found underneath made her breath catch. White threads, thousands of them. A web, a network, mycelium, the underground body of a fungus, spreading through the decomposed organic matter like a nervous system, turning 60 years of garbage into something else entirely. Something alive. Something waiting. She did not know what kind of mushroom it was. She knew nothing about fungi except that she liked them on pizza. But she knew, in the way that some people know things without knowing why, that this was not dead land. This land was not worthless. It was working. It had been working for decades, silently, in the dark, while the town dumped their bags of leaves and walked away. She sat back on her heels and looked at the acre spread out before her. 3 feet of composted leaf litter, 60 years of carbon and nitrogen. A mycelium network already established, already hungry, already converting waste into life. And nobody knew. Nobody had looked. They had seen a dump and called it worthless. They had smelled vinegar and called it poison. They had seen thistles and called it cursed. But Maya, who had spent 2 years feeling like human garbage herself, recognized something in that pile. She recognized potential that had been buried and compressed and laughed at. She recognized a thing that needed only one person to see it clearly. The hard part started the next day. She went to the Grayson County Bank to ask for a small business loan. $5,000. Enough for some basic supplies, a used tiller, maybe a small greenhouse structure. She wore her only nice outfit, the black slacks and white blouse she had kept from her receptionist days. She sat across from Gary Whitfield, the loan officer, a man who had known her since she was 12 and had coached her ex-husband in Little League. Gary looked at the appraisal. He looked at the deed. He looked at her credit score, which had the dent of medical bills from a miscarriage and the divorce and 6 months of unemployment. He folded his hands on his desk and gave her the smile that bankers give when they are about to say no. "Maya," he said, "I admire your spirit. I really do. But this property has no collateral value. The soil is compromised. The location is undesirable. And frankly, the Agricultural Extension Office lists that site as non-viable for cultivation." He said the word non-viable, like it was a medical diagnosis, like the land was terminal. He suggested she look into selling it back to the county. Maybe recoup her auction price and put the money toward a security deposit on an apartment. He used the word realistic. He used the phrase cut your losses. He did not laugh, not out loud, but his eyes did. They had the same look Derek's eyes had when she told him she wanted to start her own business someday. That look that said, "You are a small person who should stay small." She drove home in the whining truck and sat in her father's driveway because she had nowhere else to go. She was living in the spare room above the garage. The room with the slanted ceiling and the boxes of her mother's things. Her mother had died when Maya was 19, breast cancer, 6 months from diagnosis to funeral, and sometimes Maya thought the grief had just moved into her chest permanently. A tenant who never paid rent. She sat in the truck and watched the kitchen window, where her father stood at the sink, washing dishes, not looking out. She knew he had heard about the bank. In a town of 4,000 people, everyone heard everything. She knew he was waiting for her to give up. To come inside and say, "You were right, Dad." To cry. To become small again. Instead, she went to the library. The Millbrook Public Library was a single room above the post office, run by Mrs. Chen, who was 70 and had read every book in the building twice. Maya asked about mushrooms. Mrs. Chen did not laugh. She led her to the agriculture section, 4 shelves between westerns and cookbooks, and pulled down a field guide to Midwest fungi, then another book on mycology, then a USDA bulletin on forest farming. Maya sat at a table by the window and read until the light faded, and Mrs. Chen turned on the lamps. She learned that oyster mushrooms could grow on straw and coffee grounds and hardwood chips. She learned that shiitake preferred oak logs but would colonize other substrates. She learned that lion's mane, the fluffy white mushroom that looked like a sea creature, sold for $16 a pound at specialty markets. She learned that a single acre of intensively managed mushroom production, using vertical space and rotation, could yield more protein per square foot than beef cattle. She learned that what she had found in that leaf pile was not rare or magical. It was common. It was natural. It was exactly what happened when organic matter decomposed in the presence of moisture and shade. The mycelium was nature's recycling system, and she had just bought 60 years of its finest work. She started the next morning with a shovel and a wheelbarrow she found at a yard sale for $8. She cleared the thistles from the southern slope, hacking at their roots with a hatred that surprised her. Each thistle was Derek telling her she was weak. Each root was Gary Whitfield saying non-viable. Each pull of the shovel was her father's slow headshake, and she threw them all into a pile and promised herself she would burn them when the season turned. The work was brutal. The leaf mold was heavier than it looked, wet and dense, compacted by decades of snow and rain. Her hands blistered on the first day. Her back spasmed on the second. On the third day, it rained, a cold October drizzle that soaked through her hood and ran down her collar. And she worked anyway, because she had spent her last $1,200, and there was no going back. And because, for the first time since the divorce, she felt like she was doing something that belonged to her alone. She found the concrete on the 4th day. She was digging a drainage trench near the western edge, trying to redirect the water that pooled there after every rain, when her shovel struck something that rang instead of thudded. She cleared the leaves and found a slab, 4 feet square, cracked down the middle, with the faded words Millbrook Ice Co. stamped into the surface. Underneath the slab, the soil was different. Black. Not the brown-grey of clay, not the matted tan of leaves, but true black, the colour of coffee grounds, loose and fragrant and alive with worms. She got down on her knees and scooped it up in her hands. It smelled like earth, like the forest floor after rain, like something holy. She sent a sample to Michigan State University's soil lab, using the last of her cash for the testing fee, and while she waited, she worked. She built raised beds from discarded pallets. She scavenged from behind the hardware store. She collected coffee grounds in 5-gallon buckets from the diner on Main Street, where the owner, a woman named Rosa, who had also been divorced, Young, let her take as much as she wanted. Rosa asked what she was doing, and Maya told her, and Rosa did not laugh. Rosa gave her a bag of oyster mushroom spawn she had ordered online for her own garden, but never used. "It's just sitting in my fridge," Rosa said. "Make something grow." Maya carried that spawn like it was gold. She mixed it with the coffee grounds and straw she bought from a horse farm 10 miles out of town, and she packed it into the raised beds, layering it with the black soil from under the concrete slab. She watered it with a hose she dragged from her truck, 200 feet of green rubber that kinked every 10 feet. She covered the beds with plastic sheeting to hold the humidity. She worked until her hands stopped blistering and started callousing. She worked until her back stopped spasming and started strengthening. She worked until the sun went down and the stars came out, and the old textile mill stood behind her like a broken cathedral, silent and watching. The soil test came back on a Tuesday. Maya opened the envelope in the cab of her truck, her hands shaking from cold and fear. The numbers meant nothing to her at first. pH 6.8, organic matter content 14%, nitrogen high, phosphorus adequate, potassium more than adequate. And then she read the summary paragraph at the bottom, written by a graduate student named Patel, who had reviewed her sample. This soil exhibits exceptional fertility, likely resulting from long-term deposition and decomposition of mixed hardwood leaf litter. The fungal biomass is robust. With proper management, this site is highly suitable for intensive specialty crop production, particularly fungi and microgreens, highly suitable. The words glowed. She read them again. Highly suitable. Not non-viable. Not compromised. Not dead. Highly suitable. She sat in the truck and cried for 10 minutes, not because she was sad, but because she had been carrying the weight of so many other people's opinions, and for the first time she had a piece of paper that said they were wrong, that she was not crazy, that the land was not garbage, and neither was she. She expanded. She cleared more of the leaf mound, discovering that the decomposition was not uniform. Some areas were older, more broken down, more like soil than trash. Other areas were newer, still recognizable as leaves and branches, and she separated these, turning them into windrows to finish composting. She found more concrete slabs, remnants of the ice company, that had operated there before the town started dumping, and she used them as thermal mass, placing them around her growing area to absorb heat during the day and release it at night. She built a small hoop house from PVC pipe and greenhouse plastic she bought with money she made selling her mother's jewelry. Not the good pieces. The costume jewelry, the beads and bangles that her mother had loved for their color rather than their value. She sold them at the flea market and bought supplies. Each transaction felt like her mother was helping, like the past was feeding the future. By November, she had 12 raised beds inoculated with oyster spawn, 4 shiitake logs soaking in a rain barrel, and 2 experimental beds of lion's mane growing on blocks of pasteurized straw. The mycelium spread visibly, white threads colonizing the substrate, turning coffee grounds and straw into a solid mat of life. She checked them every morning before dawn, a headlamp strapped to her forehead, her breath clouding in the beam of light. She talked to them. She knew it was foolish, but she did it anyway. She told them about the auction. She told them about Derek. She told them about Gary Whitfield and his non-viable. She told them about her father, who still had not visited the property, who still shook his head at dinner, who still left newspaper clippings about job openings on her pillow. She told the mushrooms everything, and they listened. And they grew. The first pins appeared in mid-December. Tiny clusters of oyster mushrooms, no bigger than her pinky nail, pushing up through the surface of the straw. Maya saw them at 5 in the morning, her headlamp catching the white caps in the darkness, and she sank to her knees in the frozen dirt and laughed out loud. They were beautiful. They were impossible. They were growing out of garbage, out of leaf mold, out of the town's waste, and they were perfect. She harvested the first flush. 3 days later, 2 pounds of delicate, fan-shaped mushrooms with the scent of anise and earth. She carried them to Rosa's diner in a basket lined with a clean dish towel. Rosa cooked them into an omelette and put it on the special board. Sold out by noon. Rosa paid her $8 a pound and asked for more. Maya said she would have 10 pounds by Friday. She had no idea if that was true, but she said it anyway. And then she went home and made it true. She sold at the winter farmers market in the basement of the Methodist church. A table covered with a blue cloth, her mushrooms in brown paper bags with a label she designed on the library computer. Hartley fungi, Millbrook, Michigan. Grown on renewal. People were skeptical at first. Mushrooms from the dump? But they tasted them, the samples she sautéed in butter on a hot plate, and their eyes changed. These are incredible. What's your secret? She told them there was no secret. Just 60 years of leaves and a lot of stubbornness. By February, she had regular customers. By March, she was supplying 3 restaurants in the county. By April, she had added microgreens to the operation, growing pea shoots and sunflower shoots in the black soil under the hoop house, selling them to the co-op in the next town for $4 a tray. The acre that had been called worthless was producing 50 pounds of mushrooms a week and 200 trays of microgreens a month. The vinegar smell was gone, replaced by the rich, loamy scent of active compost. The thistles were gone, replaced by rows of white and brown and golden fungi. The devil's weed was gone, choked out by the dense canopy of the hoop house and the constant activity of cultivation. Maya had transformed the ugliest acre in the county into something that looked, in the right light, like a miracle. She kept records. She was not naturally organized, but she forced herself to be, because nobody was coming to save her if she failed. She tracked every expense, every pound harvested, every mile driven, the spawn cost, the straw cost, the water cost, the diesel for the truck. By June, she had invested another $3,000 into the operation. Money she made from sales, money she reinvested instead of paying herself. She lived on Rosa's diner food and the vegetables she traded for at the market. She wore the same 3 work shirts until they had holes. She did not buy new boots when hers split at the seam. She duct taped them and kept working. Her father watched from the kitchen window, and slowly, so slowly she almost missed it, his head stopped shaking. One morning in July, she came down from the garage apartment and found a thermos of coffee on the hood of her truck. Her father's thermos. He was already gone, off to his job at the lumberyard. But the thermos was there, and it was still hot, and she stood in the driveway and drank it and cried again, because that was the first gift he had given her in years that did not come with advice or warning, or the weight of his disappointment. The summer was a blur of heat and humidity and growth. The mushrooms loved the warm nights. The microgreens loved the long days. She added reishi for the herbal medicine market, growing the red woody brackets on logs under shade cloth. She added maitake, the hen of the woods, at the request of a chef from Ann Arbor who drove 2 hours to buy her entire oyster crop for his farm-to-table restaurant. He stood in the middle of her acre in his leather shoes and his designer glasses, looking at the raised beds and the hoop houses and the woman with dirt under her fingernails, and duct-taped boots, and he asked how she had done it. Maya told him about the tax auction. She told him about the mycelium. She told him about the concrete slab and the soil test and the headlamp at 5 in the morning. The chef listened, and then he offered her a contract. 20 pounds of mixed gourmet mushrooms every week for the rest of the year. Guaranteed purchase. Price locked at $14 a pound. He shook her hand, and his hand was soft, and hers was rough, and the contrast made her feel strong instead of ashamed. She hired help in August. Not because she needed saving, but because she could not keep up. A teenager from the high school, Marcus, whose mother worked with Rosa at the diner. Marcus was quiet and strong and did not ask stupid questions. He showed up at 6 in the morning and learned to harvest without bruising the caps. He learned to pasteurize straw in a metal drum over a propane burner. He learned to spot contamination, the green mold that meant a batch was lost, and he learned to remove it quickly before it spread. Maya paid him $12 an hour, more than she paid herself, and she did it because she remembered what it felt like to have nothing, to be worth nothing, and she would not do that to another person. Marcus bought a car with his wages, a 2004 Honda Civic with a cracked windshield, and he drove it to work every day with pride that Maya recognized, because she felt it too, every time she turned onto Mill Road and saw her acre shining in the sun. The numbers accumulated. She kept them in a green ledger, the kind with columns that she bought at the dollar store. By September, she had grossed $38,000. By October, $44,000. The 1-year anniversary of the auction approached, and she knew, with the certainty of someone who has counted every penny, that she would cross $50,000 before the gavel's echo faded from memory. $50,000 from 1 acre, from leaf mold and coffee grounds, and a woman who had been laughed at. She sat in her hoop house on the anniversary morning, the same morning she had stood in the frost and felt worthless, and she wrote the final number in the ledger, $52,416. She underlined it twice. Then she walked to the center of her property, to the depression where she had first seen the white shoots, and she sat down in the dirt and she let herself feel it. The victory, the vindication, the quiet, roaring truth that she had been right and they had been wrong. Not because she was special, but because she had looked where others had turned away. She had touched the thing they called dead and found it warm. The article came out in the Grayson County Tribune in November. A reporter named Beth, young and earnest, who had heard about the mushroom farm at the dump and thought it was a human interest piece. She interviewed Maya for 2 hours, took photographs of the raised beds against the backdrop of the rusted textile mill, and wrote a headline that Maya would frame on her wall for the rest of her life. From trash to treasure, local woman turns town dump into $50K farm. The article mentioned the auction. It mentioned the laughter. It mentioned the soil test and the mycelium and the headlamp at dawn. It did not mention Derek by name, but it mentioned that she had started the project after a difficult divorce, and that was enough. Everyone in Millbrook read it. Everyone who had clapped at the auction read it. Gary Whitfield read it, sitting in his office at the bank, looking at the photograph of Maya in her duct-taped boots, holding a basket of oyster mushrooms, smiling in a way he had never seen when she sat across his desk, asking for $5,000. Derek came on a Saturday. Maya was harvesting maitake when she saw his truck pull up to the fence. The same truck he had driven when they were married, though now it had a new dent in the fender and a bumper sticker for his girlfriend's bank. He got out carefully, wearing jeans that were too clean for a farm, and he stood at the gap in the fence where the chain link had rusted away. He did not come through. He just stood there, looking at the hoop houses and the raised beds and the signs of life everywhere. Maya wiped her hands on her pants and walked over. She did not hurry. She did not smile. She did not feel small. Derek said her name like a question. Maya. He said he had read the article. He said he was proud of her. He said he had always known she had it in her. He said he had some money saved, and he had been thinking, maybe he could invest. Maybe they could partner. Maybe they could talk about things. Maybe, he said, they had both made mistakes. Maya looked at him. She looked at the truck with the bank bumper sticker. She looked at the acre behind her, at the mushrooms growing in the leaf mold, at the green shoots in the black soil, at the life that had come from patience and work, and the refusal to believe what everyone else believed. She thought about the nights she had cried in the garage apartment. She thought about the thermos of coffee on her truck hood. She thought about Gary Whitfield's smile, and the slow clap at the auction, and the word non-viable. She thought about the graduate student named Patel, who had written highly suitable. She thought about her mother's costume jewelry, sold to buy greenhouse plastic, and how that had felt like a prayer. She looked at Derek, and she felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction, just nothing. Like looking at a stranger who was telling a story about someone she used to know. She told him no. She did not raise her voice. She did not list his failures or remind him of the way he had smiled. She simply said, "I work alone." She said it, the way she might say the sky is blue. A fact, a choice, a boundary. Derek opened his mouth to argue, to negotiate, to use the voice he had always used when he wanted her to doubt herself. But the sound of another truck interrupted him. Her father's lumberyard truck, pulling in behind Derek's, and Jim Hartley got out, carrying a toolbox and a bag of lunch from Rosa's diner. He looked at Derek. He looked at Maya. He walked past them both, through the gap in the fence, and he set the toolbox down by the hoop house. And he said, "Tell me what needs fixing." Maya pointed to a loose corner of plastic that had torn in the last windstorm, and her father nodded. And he got to work, and he did not look back at Derek. Derek stood there for another minute, watching a father and daughter repair a greenhouse on an acre he had laughed about, and then he got in his truck and drove away, and Maya did not watch him go. She had mushrooms to harvest. Gary Whitfield came the following Monday. He wore a suit. He brought a folder. He stood in Maya's office, which was a corner of the hoop house, with a desk made from a pallet and a laptop she had bought refurbished. He said the bank had reconsidered. He said they had a new small business initiative. He said they would like to offer her a line of credit, very favorable terms, enough to expand, maybe buy more equipment, maybe hire more staff. He said they were impressed by her growth. He used the word impressive 3 times. He did not use the word non-viable. Maya listened. She offered him coffee from the thermos her father had given her, now dented and beloved. She told him she would think about it. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She had learned that power was not in the acceptance or the rejection. Power was in the choice. Power was in standing on your own acre, on soil you had healed, and deciding for yourself what happened next. She did take the loan, eventually. Not from Gary, but from a credit union in Ann Arbor that specialized in sustainable agriculture. She used it to buy the 2 acres adjacent to her property when they came up for auction the next spring. She used it to build a proper processing shed with a concrete floor and a walk-in cooler. She used it to hire Marcus full-time and to bring on 2 more employees. Both women who had also been told they were non-viable, one by a husband and one by a system that had looked at her record and seen only mistakes. She taught them to look at mycelium. She taught them to read soil tests. She taught them that the world was full of things called worthless, that were only waiting for someone patient enough to see their use. By the end of the second year, Hartley Fungi employed 5 people and grossed $97,000. By the third year, they supplied restaurants in 3 states. And Maya was invited to speak at a conference in Chicago about urban waste reclamation and fungal agriculture. She stood on a stage in a clean pair of boots, no duct tape, and she told the story of the auction. She told them about the laughter. She told them about the leaf pile and the mycelium and the concrete slab. She told them about the headlamp at 5 in the morning and the thermos on the truck hood and the word highly suitable. She told them that every town had an acre like hers. Every town had a dump, a wasteland, a place people turned away from. Every town had someone being laughed at for seeing something others could not. She told them that farming was not about having perfect land. It was about having perfect attention. It was about looking at the thing everyone called dead and asking, what lives here? What wants to grow? What has been waiting for me? The audience gave her a standing ovation. But Maya was thinking about her acre. She was thinking about the mushrooms pushing up through the dark, turning waste into food, turning poison into medicine, turning laughter into proof. She was thinking about her father, who now worked part-time at the farm, who had built the new hoop house with his own hands, who no longer shook his head but nodded it, slowly, with a pride that was heavier and more real than his disappointment had ever been. She was thinking about Rosa, who still saved coffee grounds, who had become her closest friend, who had taught her that the women who survive are the women who help other women. She was thinking about Marcus, who was now studying agriculture at the community college, paying his own way, planning to start his own farm someday on land everyone else had ignored. And she was thinking about the girl she had been, the one who stood in the frost with $1,200 and a broken heart, the one who had been laughed at for buying a wasteland. That girl was still there, in a way. She was in every early morning, in every blister, in every moment of doubt before the harvest came in. But she was also gone, replaced by a woman who knew that value was not something given by an appraiser or a banker or an ex-husband. Value was something you built, something you grew, something you pulled from the dark with your own 2 hands, one mushroom at a time, one morning at a time, 1 acre at a time, until the people who laughed had no choice but to be silent, and then to listen, and then to learn. The land had taught her that. The mycelium had taught her that. The quiet, persistent work of decay and renewal had taught her that nothing is ever truly finished, nothing is ever truly wasted, and no one is ever truly lost as long as they keep digging.